everyone. All right, welcome back to the Bat of Doom track at Virtual KernelCon 2020. Our next speaker, Jay, has been writing software for basically as long as he could read and write. I think a long time, and he's an NPS grad, so we have some common history there in the fun Central California area. But he's got a pretty sort of timely, and we were just chatting ahead of time, perhaps a little bit ironic due to some of the circumstances. But in any case, it's a very interesting topic and an interesting talk about DIY artificial pancreas. And with that, I will just turn it over to Jay.
All right. Thank you, Tim, and the rest of the KernelCon crew for getting this virtual conference kind of, set up in, very little notice. And thanks to anybody watching for coming. So yeah, this is the DIY artificial pancreas talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and my background. We'll give an introduction to diabetes so that we're all on the same page. And we'll talk about some hardware, software, and safety aspects. We'll look at some iterative improvements that I've made to making these devices over the last few years. We'll do a live demo. I'll show some results both for myself and for the industry and the regulatory frameworks. And we'll talk about something that I call exponential growth. And finally, I'll take questions. So who am I? As we said, my name's Jay. I went to UMBC in Maryland and got a bachelor's of science in computer science. And I did also go to the Naval Postgraduate School. I have a CISSP and various SANS certs over the years. And I'm a developer first. I'm also an IT consultant, and I'm a licensed private investigator out of DC. I've done lots of things, and one of the things that I'm most proud of is I took a Maryland-based ambulance company out of a renovated house and a closet where the server lived into a warehouse with an actual data center, and I'm pretty proud of them. It took them about 10 years. And I've worked for other sectors, and I've worked for myself. And so when I'm not a Win32C programmer, I like to mess around in .NET. One of the things that when I was first diagnosed with this that they gave me was a paper table to track all of my data, that was only 10 years ago. So that was a little ridiculous. And I thought I'd be, unique, and I'll make a web service and a web app, and I'll track my data and I'll open it up so other people can track their data. No one's thought of this before, right? That's incorrect. So turns out I'm unique just like everybody else. The first thing that every techie does once they've been diagnosed is to try to solve the problem with software and hardware. For those of you who don't know, this is Scott Hanselman. He's a developer evangelist at Microsoft. He tells a lot of truths here. So yeah. Anyway, let's talk about diabetes and what it is and what we're talking about today. So diabetes affects about 200 million people worldwide, and it comes in two flavors. There's a deficiency in the pancreas to properly produce insulin, which is type 1. It's genetic, but there's an environmental factor that nobody really understands. This is what we're talking about today. The other type, and there are several others, but these are the two that most people know about, is a deficiency in the body to absorb insulin. This is the one where if you're gaining a little weight and you start to have your blood sugar go a little higher, your doctor might say to adjust your diet and exercise, and you can quash this thing. That is true, but for a type 1, there is no quashing this. There is no diet and exercise changes that you can make that will get rid of this. So again, today we are going to talk only about type 1 diabetes. And all of us have heard this meme that there's going to be a cure in 5 years. Certainly 10 years ago at a hospital bedside, that was nearly the first thing the doctor said to me. And 5 years after that, there wasn't a cure. And here we are 5 years after that, and there's still no cure, and there's not really one on the horizon. Besides which, it sounds like the medical community is a little busy right now, so they might be putting stuff on hold. Now, insulin is a hormone required to sustain human life. So people with the disease have to obtain it from another source. And there are two primary kinds. There's a long-acting kind that keeps your blood sugar steady over the course of 12 or 24 hours because your liver is constantly dumping glucose into your system and trying to raise your blood sugar. Long-acting will put that level again. And then there's short-acting, which if your blood sugar is too high, you can use over the course of hours to lower it, or you can counteract the effect of eating to, again, keep that line straight. That's really what we're looking for. And it's all very easy to administer. The formula accounts for carbohydrates and physical activity, sickness, pre-existing insulin levels, how much have you taken previously and is still left over in your system, plus adrenaline, plus insulin sensitivity, which changes over time. And you have to straddle this tenuous line between your blood sugar being too high or being too low. And where probably just about everybody watching the stream is about 100. That's where we strive for. Now, if you go too high or remain too high for too long, it can take years off your life. And in extreme high levels, it can cause stroke, seizures, organ failure, brain damage, and death over a period of hours or days. And you think, that all sounds pretty terrible. So what do we do? What happens if we say instead, try to lower it below 100? And that's much worse. If you drop too low through exercise or insulin use, after maybe tens of minutes of progressing through anxiety and tremors and dizziness and confusion and heart palpitations, right after you pass out at around 35, without intervention, you will die. And this is assuming that you feel it. There's a category of people called hypo-unaware who won't feel any of these symptoms. And so this kind of technology that we're going to talk about is really a life requirement for them. And it's a difficult balance to maintain consistently. So many patients choose to allow their blood sugar to ride a little higher than it should be over time, just because in the immediate term, it's easier that way. Now, again, this is the formula that we've kind of settled on-ish. You can't measure all of these values. For example, I don't have 3.6 today. I have raised adrenaline compared to everybody watching because I'm on camera, but there's no real way to quantify that or what it's going to do to my blood sugar levels. And also, I mean, we know that running 2 miles takes twice the energy of running 1 mile, but you can't, again, categorize or quantify that effect on your blood sugar level. You also don't know that carbohydrates are going to hit you at the same time that the insulin becomes effective. So the carbohydrates are trying to raise your blood sugar, the insulin is trying to lower it, and if the insulin goes first before the carbohydrates kick in, now you're in a low blood sugar situation. And it's all too common for that to happen, even in the best of circumstances. And your sensitivity to insulin will change over time and is different in every person. And I don't just mean over years. I mean, it will change from every few weeks to every other few weeks and in a 24-hour period in certain situations. And one thing that I didn't mention already is that you have to maintain all of this while you sleep. It's a 24/7 disease and you don't get to take breaks. So that's living with it. But how do we measure how well we're doing? There's an A1C blood test that'll measure a chemical related to your glucose levels, amortized or averaged around a period of about 3 months. And in aggregate, it's a good approximation of how close your average blood sugar was over time. Well, again, we want to be at about 100. The A1C test that you're shooting for is about 6. And blood sugar fluctuates during the day due to eating. So you have to maintain that control because it affects your A1C. You can't lie to your doctor about it because the blood doesn't lie. And finally, your blood sugar should not fluctuate wildly during sleep. So as long as you go to bed and last all of your nights fine, you get that measurement improvement for free, so to speak, because you're not balancing eating and hunger and insulin use. Now, some technology does make it easier to maintain some form of control over your blood sugar, but it largely goes towards easing the burden of monitoring and managing the symptoms. None of these solutions take a decision-making role in management of the disease. You always have to have a human in the loop. Now, the first thing that people think about when they think diabetes is they think injections, and you're giving yourself multiple injections of different kinds of insulin through the day, maybe 5, 7 times, maybe 9 times if you're having a particularly bad day. So to solve that, we use something called an insulin pump, which slowly doses background insulin throughout the day, and it can give you larger doses, which are riskier, required at meals. I mentioned there are 2 types of insulin. This one uses only the fast-acting insulin, and it simulates the effect of long-acting insulin by dosing that insulin ever so slightly every few minutes. And it's worn for days at a time, which eliminates painful injections throughout the day. You only do it maybe once every 3 or 4 days, and it does eliminate a lot of medical waste. So one problem managed better. The other thing that people think about when they think diabetes is sticking your finger and using that to get a blood glucose measurement. And most people will still have to do that all the time. It's a point-in-time measurement, and it gives you no real-world context like trend. And so if I do a finger stick and it says 130, I might be good to eat, and I'll add insulin. But in 5 minutes, it might be 120, so it was descending pretty rapidly. Well, now I've added insulin, making it much more likely that I'm going to have a low blood sugar situation, even though all the information I knew was acted on correctly at the time. Now, to fix this, what they've developed is a continuous glucose monitor. And it's a sensor that stays attached to you for maybe 7, 10, 14 days at a time. Depends on the manufacturer. And it takes a reading every 5 minutes, so you get those trends. And further, you get alarms on the receiver when you venture outside of the safe zones. And what that can do at night is wake you up, which, positives and negatives. Positives, you don't die in your sleep. Negatives, now you're awake and it's 2 in the morning. Now, CGMs measure a chemical in the interstitial fluid under your skin, and it uses a very expensive to develop and test algorithm to interpret the raw sensor data into something that resembles a measurement that we're looking for. And this is important for later, so keep it in mind. And I want to leave you with some last tips on how to survive with this disease and some statistics on how well you're probably going to do. So first thing to go, no bedtime snacks. You just don't know what's going to happen when you sleep. The second is you unintentionally go to bed on the higher end of the scale, but not too high, because that unthinking insulin pump is slowly going to drop your numbers over the course of the night. You don't want to wake up too low, and you'd prefer not to have an alarm go off. And finally, every meal, even meals that are often predictable, you could have at the same time every day and exactly the same amount, can be an hours-long battle to get back to normal, because your body fights you for reasons no one really understands. And lastly, the rule of thumb, if you wake up too high, there is no recovery to a good state during the day. You're going to overcorrect, and then you're going to overcorrect high, and then you're going to overcorrect back down, and it's a lost cause. Just try to manage it as much as you can and wait for tomorrow. So let's look at some statistics for how successful people are in one specific setting. This is a figure from the effect of diabetes mellitus on the outcomes of hyperglycemia in a mixed medical surgical intensive care unit. It was published in May 2011, and if we define in range as being between 80 and 180, these 235 individuals spent about 65% of the time in the good range in an ICU. So if people who are monitored by medical professionals can't achieve barely more than 50% success, I don't know what hope anybody of us out here on the street could really ever hope to achieve all by themselves. So we talked about the diabetes and getting ourselves all on the same page. Let's talk about hardware that we're going to use to solve our problem. And what is our problem? None of the FDA certified components take action on behalf of the patient, and a human is still required to be in the loop. So we need to develop a situation that takes data from a CGM, processes it with what it already knows about our bodies and its current state, and predicts future effects based on existing state proposed changes and calculations gotten from the medication manufacturers. And then it delivers a command to an insulin pump to do something other than to deliver that regular unchanging background insulin. So it requires us to overcome 4 technical challenges. We need a small, low-power, portable platform that the user can take with them. We need a visualization solution that allows us to monitor the system historically and as it works in real time. And we need to collect blood sugar readings from an FDA-certified CGM system and deliver a command or query an FDA-certified insulin pump. And these last 2 are almost the most important thing out of this whole endeavor. So the hardware part is actually really easy. Grab a Raspberry Pi and an Intel Edison, and you're pretty much good to go for your processors. I think 10 years ago, this probably would have been a little bit harder of an ask, but nowadays you can grab these things anywhere, even off Amazon. And they both have built-in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, so connectivity to either Wi-Fi networks or your phone to tether as you're out and about makes things really easy, because we're going to want to put our data somewhere. And finally, we can either collect CGM data over Bluetooth, because some of these CGM devices transmit using Bluetooth without having to plug the manufacturer-provided receiver into the board. Although we can do that, it's just a little more bulky. Now, we've solved the 2 easiest problems, and so the open source hardware community stepped in and solved the problem that we have with the insulin pumps. They use a 900 megahertz radio with a proprietary command set, and so we needed a 900 megahertz radio in order to communicate with it. And the open source community came in and said, okay, we have the Explorer board for the Intel Edison and the Explorer hat for the Raspberry Pi, and I'll show pictures of these. And while it is advertised as a general purpose ISM band radio, it was made for us. And the other very important component of this was that the protocol was reverse engineered over a period of years by a man named Ben West, without whom none of this would be possible at all. So our hardware looks to be pretty well and truly in hand. And so let's talk software. The visualization stack would be Node and Go, Mongo for the data storage, and Python and Bash. And what came out of this is something called Night Scout, and it's purpose-built specifically to monitor diabetics, whether it's yourself or for those under your care, say a middle or high school-aged student or an older relative. And each person builds their own Night Scout instance. It's not a service, but it does fit very well within the Heroku and Azure free tier plan limits, or you can write it, or you can run it on private infrastructure. So there are walkthroughs to install it on Linux, or there are walkthroughs to install it on Windows, if that's what you prefer. For example, I don't run mine in the cloud, but it is very point and shoot for cloud infrastructure, because it's not meant to be done by very technical patients. Now, Night Scout is good for point-in-time representation of how things are now, and it's also good to give our artificial pancreas solution insight into what we're about to do. So if I use Night Scout's web portal to say I'm about to eat 15 grams of carbs, well, every 5 minutes, the artificial pancreas queries Night Scout and says, is anything new happening? Is anything new happening? Oh, he's about to eat. I'm going to factor that in. And finally, it serves as a great reporting tool because all of your data is going there anyway. And so you can generate charts and reports to bring to your medical appointments. And finally, to get to the point, the Open Artificial Pancreas System, or Open APS, is that panacea that I've been talking about today. And it runs on Node, Python, Go, and Bash. It runs on Linux, on the Pi, or on the Intel Edison firmware image that you flash. And it's designed to do everything that we wanted, which is acquire CGM data, process it using an algorithm, deliver a dosing command to an insulin pump. As of middle last year, more than 1,440 people are using it around the world. And I say more than because it's free to download. You don't have to ask permission. And these are only the people who have kind of raised their hand and say, yes, I'm going to do it. And so for that, using FDA certified CGM hardware and insulin pumps, the amount of hours that have been run, person hours, so to speak, is 13.7 million. And again, that's a I want to say 9-month-old number. So it's got a lot of experience, and of all of that experience, no one has gone to the hospital. So our very complicated equation, a person can be expected to do that maybe several times per day. It's very intensive, but OpenAPS gets a blood sugar reading every 5 minutes, which is about 300 times a day. And it can do all of this processing not only faster than I can because I'm bad at math, but also, most importantly, when you're sleeping. So you get your sleep back. Now, better decision-making is possible because it can do more math than I can even understand. So it has the insulin absorption models from the drug manufacturers. And so it can say, if I dose at this time, over here at this time, I know what that's going to look like in the patient's body, roughly. It also automatically tunes itself to your carb and insulin absorption and sensitivity over weeks, and it senses over the last 24 hours when your body is more sensitive or less sensitive. It does that automatically. And the other feature that I particularly like is it can give you advanced warnings because it knows roughly what the future is going to look like. So it can tell you should eat 10 carbs because if you don't, in about 20 or 30 minutes, you're going to bottom out with low blood sugar. When you get that kind of notification on your phone, you can easily get up and have a snack. I can say for every time that I've gotten those warnings and not overcorrected in the carbs that it recommends, I have not experienced that low in the future. And I also have overcorrected such that my blood sugar is too high, which is also not great. So this basically helps you right the ship. So a normal diabetic patient can be expected to wake up at least once or twice every night to alarms that require action. And OpenAPS keeps the patient within range without the patient having to do anything. So sleep is one particular area of life that improves dramatically and almost immediately. I went from getting no more than 6 uninterrupted hours of sleep at a time to, on the first day, sleeping 10 straight hours. And it was nothing short of glorious. And a sleeping patient isn't eating, so it's very easy for the system to maintain them within that range just by adjusting that background insulin dosage as the night goes on. And remember, good time in range, especially at night, improves your A1C measurement without any work on the patient's part. I don't want you to take my word for it about the sleep. This is a random Twitter user whose first reaction was, I slept so well, no alarms, this is going to be life-changing. It is the first thing people notice, and it's incredible. Now, everybody has been using this while developing it, building the plane while you're flying it. And safety is a critical factor into the way changes and features are implemented because we don't want someone to be hospitalized. There are several checks and double checks made before dosing decisions are made to make sure that the consistency of all of the devices or information is consistent within all of the devices so that the right decision is being made. And there are fallback behaviors defined for new failure modes. And finally, features that impact the algorithm are scrutinized heavily. And what I don't want you to hear is that, like OpenSSL and Heartbleed, many eyes make bugs shallow. That is not what I'm saying here. There are a core group of developers through whom all algorithm changes must go, and without the say-so of that group, they don't happen. So we did talk about new failure modes because now there is a device in between your CGM and your insulin pump, where usually there used to be a person. So if OpenAPS is out of range of the source of glucose readings, if it is out of range of the insulin pump, if a process on OpenAPS on the OpenAPS device dies because Linux was being Linux that day and it needs to be restarted, or if there's power loss in one or more devices, and commands are delivered such that after any of these things happen, the pump behavior, either immediately or after a very short amount of time, reverts to its normal dumb factory behavior of just unthinking slow doses. And during sleep, the manufacturer-provided CGM receiver can be used as a secondary safety system. If you're plugging your CGM receiver into OpenAPS itself, it is already a second system, a separate system, so it's not going to fail when the larger device fails. Your alarms will still work. And if you're pulling blood sugar readings off the transmitter directly via Bluetooth, those readings also still go to that separate receiver. So again, you have your backup safety system there. Now, normal routines operate by making drastic changes that can't be undone. So if I'm going to have a cheeseburger, that might be 6 units of insulin, and that is a lot. So one indirect safety factor that was sort of discovered, and it makes perfect sense when you follow it through to its logical conclusion. If you make very small changes every 5 minutes, it allows the system to self-correct after just 5 more minutes if the situation changed unpredictably. So if you have a rapid rise, you add more insulin. And if you have an unexpected descent, you suspend delivery instead of piling all of that in at once, and then you can't take it back. Now, this is key during meals because you don't take the entire insulin dose at the beginning of the meal and just hope the body doesn't process the insulin faster. Taking the whole dose has a non-zero chance of low blood sugar. And both of the times that I had an episode where I was sure I was going to pass out, that's exactly what happened. Based on all of the information available to me, I made the right decision, but the insulin went faster than it was supposed to. So OpenAPS mimics the pancreas's normal function. It slowly doses insulin as the body processes carbohydrates and keeps the patient's blood sugar from the extremes. And a lesser amount of insulin in a person's system at any given time reduces the overall likelihood that they experience a blood sugar drop. And if they do have one, it's less likely to be, or it will be less extreme. So speaking of safety, let's look at some safety aspects that were discussed in the media last year where poor choices cost people some reputations. I mentioned that we were required to overcome 4 technical challenges. One of the most important is that blood sugar readings should be from an FDA-certified source. This is rule number 1 of Fight Club, and all of us at a HackerCon can understand garbage in, garbage out, right? So when someone tries to interpret raw sensor data their own way and has their devices act on it for them based on that flawed data, and then lands themselves in the hospital because of it, it's pretty frustrating to the rest of us because now regulators and manufacturers are practically required to go out and add fear, uncertainty, and doubt to the discussion. And there are second order effects as well. So older pumps that have wireless connectivity allowed the manufacturer to use this proprietary protocol, and it allows us to do it too. So this was actually discovered during a Black Hat talk in 2013, and it did have an emphasis towards how it could be misused, but they didn't actually do it. Now, manufacturers, after that talk, significantly limited how the functionality could be used on newer pumps, but the wrinkle, so this wrinkle requires us to find and purchase older, used, and out-of-warranty pumps and use our custom hardware and software. So Medtronic stopped manufacturing pumps that were remotely controllable, but they didn't recall the devices. So you could go to eBay or Craigslist or Mercari or MedWow or wherever, and you could find these devices, but it was already super hard. And because nobody can resist a chance to take advantage of an already disadvantaged community, the prices for these old, again, well used, for years used, and out of warranty devices went from $300, they skyrocketed to over $1,000 when people realized there was a price to be paid for this. And after the CGM warning about the unapproved uses of medical devices, meaning CGM algorithms, another bomb drops. So just 1 month later, Medtronic recalls all of those old insulin pumps. And wouldn't it be funny if the compatibility list up in green with OpenAPS wasn't the same as everything in the article that says was recalled? That Venn diagram is damn near a circle. Now, Scott here says that they're covering bases. In my own opinion, I thought they were covering their asses until about 3 weeks later when this article came out. Because these assholes who couldn't have done any prior research would have easily stumbled on the thousands of people who were using these devices for good for about 4 years without any hospitalizations. They probably just took the code out of OpenAPS and rolled it into an Android app. So we care about safety, others don't seem to, or at least not as much. Let's talk about some iterative improvements I've made over the last 3 years with the devices that I've made. Some of them are large. They require, they're in a big shave kit, banana for scale, of course. And it's pretty weighty, but you could keep it in a backpack. And I've made others that are small enough to fit unnoticed in a pant leg pocket. That's this one. It fits pretty easily in a pocket without anybody noticing. And each iteration and choice of component reduced the size and improved portability and battery life. Because again, we're building this plane while we fly it. And I was also able to contribute some code to OpenAPS to work with new FDA certified devices and reduce friction around installing the system. So back at the very beginning, there was a very long, very Linuxy series of steps that you had to take to install this device on your Raspberry Pi. And if you did it out of order or not everything perfectly at the end, you had garbage and it just didn't work. And so someone came up with the idea of an interactive setup script where you told it what technology you were using and a little bit of other information, and it went and pulled packages and it used make to build everything on the device. And so that was a super big improvement. And one thing that I contributed there was to add one FDA certified device, CGM reader or receiver, I should say, and to pull in a package that other folks had made to read the Bluetooth CGM sensors. Just pull that straight from setup because it was previously a secondary step. I worked with them to maximize flexibility around connectivity and to make it so that you didn't have to have an internet connection for it to work when one isn't available. So I was going through, I had a commute every day that required 2 train trips, subway train trips, and the connection would flap when you're in the tunnels, of course. And so one thing that I contributed was to make this a little more resilient. Instead of saying at the first blip, oh, my connection is gone, I can't do anything for an hour, it would keep trying for a longer period of time. And people use this, out of civilization. They go on hours-long hikes, and this thing just keeps working. Really, the only thing that that it does when you come back to civilization is it dumps all of the data that it spent offline gathered offline into Night Scout. Because when you think about it, all of the data it really needs to make decisions from the time that connection drops out is local to your person anyway. And finally, as long as it gets NTP's time when it starts up, it doesn't need to be connected to the internet continuously. And so I have restarted a Pancreas on an air trip on an airplane, and really all you have to do is SSH into your Pancreas and tell it what time it is, and everything just sort of works. So I have some pictures here. This is a more broken out view of the shave bag that I just held up. That's a 26 amp hour USB battery. You get about 24, 36 continuous hours of operation from that. That's the original G5 receiver. This one, this is the newer G6 one. It's a touch screen, so it's confused but for a phone by all the wrong people. And the difference between the two is the newer one, the one that I just held up, its data structures are slightly different. So from the time that I got it and opened it up to, I think it was about 8 hours later, I was able to reverse engineer the data structures and get them working with OpenAPS. Because at the time, there was no way to read directly off the Bluetooth. And this is a little radio stick. Medtronic has a web service that I swear to God operates with Java and JNI to shovel bits from your insulin pump through this little radio stick, USB radio stick, up to their cloud so that you can do some analytics. And this thing, I don't know whether to attribute it to either malice or incompetence, but like a foot or two away, and this thing stops communicating with the insulin pump. This thing works like 10 feet away. And when I think about the large multinational medical conglomerate that is Medtronics, and in comparison, what is effectively randos on the internet that can make it work 10 feet away. Again, I don't know if it's malice or incompetence. I guess I leave that up to you. And finally, this is just the Raspberry Pi 2. And one thing that I did to this bag that was actually super helpful was I stitched and super glued 6-inch micro USB female to male adapters. So instead of digging out the battery at the end of every day to plug it in, it had pass-through power, which was really nice. At the end of the day, I kept the bag all closed and sealed up. I just plugged the bag in. These are better pictures of the Intel Edison with the radio board on it. That's the inside of this. This one is made so that you can connect via USB on the go. You can see the cable in the picture. This receiver, it's still pretty bulky. This battery gives you about, I want to say about 24 hours with it. And the reason that you need the battery is because USB on the go requires that 5 volts. If you are just reading off the Bluetooth, this 3.7 volt LiPo is just fine. That'll get you maybe 8 hours if you're using Wi-Fi, and something like 12 if you're just using Bluetooth tethering. And if you see in that box, I used those red and black wires as a separate connector. I didn't know how often I was going to be replacing those LiPo batteries, and so it's it gives you a little cutoff switch, and if I need to replace the battery, the wear and tear is on that cable and not on the device itself. So this is the latest generation. This is the 3rd generation, and it's a Raspberry Pi 0 under this radio board. And the radio board looks like this. It's super small, and it's got this screen on it. The Edison was an incredible reduction in size, but there was no real way to query, to look at what's going on in the system if you didn't have connectivity. This screen eliminates that. You can also use these buttons to bring up a menu that'll do things like tell you what its IP address is on various interfaces. So if you add it to a new Wi-Fi network, you're not hunting for it on that new network. And the other thing that I rely on, this is a Fitbit watch face that looks a lot like Night Scout. It's if you see the green line, that is what has happened, and then after that vertical blue line, there are several possibilities of what might happen later. It also shows you your number now. That's 91 in this picture, and what the difference is from the number before. We can see that's -1. So 5 minutes ago, or I should say 2 minutes ago, it was 92. And so now I'll move on to the live demo. The live demo has been running basically this entire time, not basically, it's been running this entire time. This is Night Scout. You can see here that the number here is what my current blood glucose is now, a change of +1. There are no carbs in my system, and I can't see because of the zoom window. It looks like there's 0.38 units of insulin already in my body. The last time the algorithm ran was 8 minutes ago. This battery and reservoir are a little low, so I'm going to need to change that before I leave the house in 3 years. And we can see the status of the CGM read was good. You see these gray line, and it tells you a little bit more as well. I changed this morning. Now you can see this gray line here. Those are what happened in the real world. And then right here, you see this lighter gray. I knew that I was going to talk and my adrenaline was going to try and push my blood sugar down probably. And so what I asked it to do is for the next 2 hours, starting at 3, only really try to get me up to between 120 and 130. Instead of the usual 100, which could then result in a low blood sugar event. And if you look up here at the top in this icicle pattern, this is using less insulin in background, and this is using more. It is taking a lighter touch than normal. Instead of using these boluses, these larger boluses, it's trying to lower or even out my blood sugar using just the background insulin. And these are various predictions for what that is going to look like at certain times. I think it's 2 or 3 hours of prediction, depending on which one and what the rest of your system looks like. And so if I turn all of this off now, it looks like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, the pump is going to revert to its standard dumb, unthinking behavior. So there's our failure mode implemented right there. And the other thing that I wanted to show are logs from the system running in real time. This one is not in real time because it's not easily predictable. But this is the service that does your blood glucose readings, syncing with Night Scout, and then waiting for a Bluetooth connection. And then this is it chattering back and forth, getting the sensor data and information about the session, and then using it to calibrate everything. And then right about here, uploading it to OpenAPS and to Night Scout at the same time, and then waiting for another connection. What's going on over here is it does a ping, so to speak, to make sure that the pump can be communicated with. It checks to see if anything new has happened. And then it sees that it's received a new blood glucose value. So it's going to kick off all of this stuff to measure what's been going on and predict, that's down here, what will happen in the future. And this is the suggestion. This is the suggestion of this is what I'm going to do. This is the decision I'm going to make. This isn't like your normal AI stuff where it makes a decision and you don't have any goddamn idea why. This thing tells you explicitly why it did it and when it did it. You can tell now that it's updating the pump history again because it made a change and wants to make sure that that change reflects reality. And so that is the live demo. And now let's talk results. So April to June 2016, those were the first 3 months that I lit this up, and I didn't have it make any decisions. I just wanted to see what it would do. Now you'll notice that the normal is about 70%. Again, that's between 80 and 180, and the high was 30%, and there were no lows. And the high or the normal was also pretty high. It was about 150. Remember, again, we're shooting for 100. The reason for that was, again, I had several back-to-back low blood sugar events where I was not in a good headspace after that. I figured I'm just going to let this ride a little higher than I should. Damn the consequences. And if you look at the A1C estimate over on the right, that's about 7.4. And I mentioned that the number we're shooting for is 6. Not good. So down below, June to August of 2019, this is with OpenAPS, the latest versions. Normal was 89.4, almost 90% compliance in normal range. The high was 7.5, so not nearly as much, and it was a relatively lower high. It was right around 200. But again, if your upper ceiling is 180, 181 is considered high. And there was a little bit of low time there, but the low wasn't that low. It was about 70. And for that time, from my own recollection and the data that I kept, there were no serious bottoming outs. And if you look at the A1C estimate there, it's about 6.1. You can barely ask for anything better. And I find these estimates to be off by about 0.2% plus or minus. So this is pretty good. Now, this is the same data, but shown as it relates to hours per day. So you see up at the top, the one from 2016, the numbers range largely from 150 to 200, and at the bottom, they range largely from 100 to 150, and you can see those two high peaks or higher peaks right after lunch and right after dinner. But OpenAPS brings them straight back down pretty quickly, whereas up at the top, it was just all high blood sugar all the time. Now, this is my ongoing rolling chart from when I was diagnosed 10 years ago. That ain't good. And so I got it under control pretty quickly, and everything else you see is manual control. So right about oh, there we go. Right about there, that third bullet, that was the point at which after I had those two scares, and the next three readings you see are the higher values that represent the higher overall blood sugar. And that fourth arrow that you see, that was after 6 months of using OpenAPS just at night. And I want to emphasize that I was able to have snacks before bed. I wasn't going to bed at that very high level. I let OpenAPS handle my meals. I just look at the numbers to make sure that they're generally tracking to what I want. The cognitive load and the effort to do things was so much lower. And that's where I am about a year ago at 6.3, and that was super good. And I wanted to update this chart. I was supposed to have an appointment to do that 2 weeks ago, but I don't know, everybody got busy with something, so I don't have a new number for you. Night Scout says the estimate is about 6.0, so about 0.2% one way or the other is not big either way, but 6.0 is a really good number. So those are my results and my changes. Let's talk about the industry. Previously, these were all integrated monolithic systems. The sensors were glorified random number generators in some cases, and all of the components communicated with each other over proprietary protocols. This dumb insulin pump is $8,000, and these are still the same things that can be found today. They're incredibly expensive for the one job that they do. And I'll grant that Medtronic has come a bit of a ways since then. This system it does take a little bit more of a decision-making role in your treatment, but it doesn't suspend dispensation of insulin without freaking out, so you still have the alarms. It'll slightly adjust your background levels, but it won't handle your meals for you. And it's not tunable in any way, and this is a very person-specific disease. Now, about 40% of people leave this system because it doesn't work consistently enough to be worth the trouble it takes to keep it in auto mode anyway. So what good is it doing if it's too hard to use? Now, the regulatory framework has changed in the last 3 years as well. There are now certifications for discrete CGMs, pumps, and algorithms that you can pick together. Manufacturers can pick together and have them work, and you don't need to have them certified collectively, just individually. The first one to get the CGM certification, called iCGM, is the Dexcom G6. And the first manufacturer to get what is called an alternate controller enabled device, which is an insulin pump, is Tandem with the T-Slim X2. And what's really impressive about this device is it is field upgradable with new software. The one that I use is, it's burned in ROM. This thing, you hook up a USB stick and use their installer. And they have been delivering features for this thing over the last few years that way, which is pretty cool. And the third aspect is the iController. This is the OpenAPS stand-in. It's the algorithm and that brings together the iCGM and the ACE to autopilot the patient. And there are no certified products yet, but an organization called Tidepool is trying to get an FDA-certified version of Loop, which is another open source artificial pancreas system that works on iPhones with a little relay device called a Riley Link. And Tandem is trying to use a company called Type Zero's product into that insulin pump you just saw by the end of the year. Although I guess schedules are in flux now, who knows? Now let's talk about vision. We've talked about adding intelligence to old tech, and the bare minimum intelligence added to the newer tech. But what's the dream? So this is a concept diagram or concept image of a device from Bigfoot Biomedical. It's a bihormonal insulin pump, insulin glucose pump, and that part there is key. If you can get a stable glucose suspension, and allegedly they're working with a manufacturer that shows promise, instead of the only actions that an insulin pump can take is reduce blood sugar by dumping insulin in, or harm reduction by not dumping insulin in. This can take the active alternative, which is to dump glucose into the body to correct a low. That plus the algorithm that they're trying to work on, that really is that's the dream. That's what everybody's looking for. And I will say that none of this would be possible without the folks behind the hashtag We're Not Waiting. I mentioned that we've heard that there's going to be a cure for this in 5 years, and people just got tired of being fed that line. And so none of this would have happened the last few years if we just remained complacent with the clunky 90s garbage tech that and these people who are not doctors who started this and changed an entire field of medicine. So they should all be very proud of themselves. And the last thing that I want to talk about, it appears I do still have time, is something I call exponential growth. So everybody needs insulin. This is a biological fact. And lack of the hormone is not a question of lifestyles or choices or what the person could have done better, because it's a lightning strike that could happen to anyone watching this. And without it, you will die. It's like water. It is like air. So when predatory prices are levied on this drug, it is the financial form of your money or your life. And when people can't afford it, they start to ration it. And rationing kills people. It happens with regularity that is disturbing in a first world country. GoFundMe for insulin is like a goddamn war zone. In last June, 3 people in California under the age of 25 died because of rationing. This guy switched to a cheaper insulin to save for his wedding, and it killed him. Switching for all intents and purposes to dog insulin, which is that $25 Walmart insulin that people point to at when they say, oh, insulin is available for cheap. Think of it as the difference between using a sledgehammer when a tack hammer is the right tool. I say that not because it is not the Walmart insulin is not powerful, but because it's unnuanced. And that is, if nothing else, that is the key to this disability is nuance. So this is a graph from 1997 to 2017 of a lot of things that are related to overall inflation, which you see is that black line there over that 20-year period is about 55%. There has never been a better time to buy a TV. Software, toys, self-service, that's great. Food and beverage and housing have kept pace with inflation. Wages have risen ever so slightly, and things like medical care and child care and college have all risen dramatically. But what I don't show you on this graph is the gold line. That is 1,170% price increase for the same drug, the same formulation 20 years later. It wasn't harder to produce. It was not needed less, and therefore they had to find their profit somewhere else. This is what insulin companies are doing to the American consumer. Now, this is not a political presentation, but I agree with this senator in this tweet about this issue. If you look at other countries, they negotiate prices with drug manufacturers. If an American taxpayer-funded health plan was allowed to do that, we would see prices go down dramatically. Most people don't know that people who are on Medicaid or Medicare cannot, those programs cannot negotiate with the drug companies. So the companies are getting the money where they can. Now you have American taxpayers hit twice. They're hit if they're a consumer of that drug because they pay for it, and all otherwise healthy taxpayers pay for that as well. So the system is not doing well. Last few weeks or months, it has been doing less well. Now, I'd like to move into acknowledgements. First, again, I want to thank Colonel Cant for making this virtual and not just straight up canceling it. I can't say that if it were me, I wouldn't have canceled it, but they have done an incredible job. There have been so few blips and pops over the course of the day, and I look forward to the rest of today and tomorrow. So I want to thank Ben West again, without whose work we would not have any of this. Dana M. Lewis and Scott Librand are the founders of the OpenAPS project. Scott Hanselman I threw in here because he's cool and opinionated, and I mentioned him several times. Xtrip.js is the Bluetooth library that'll pull directly off G5 and 6 sensors, or transmitters more like, and feed that into OpenAPS, reducing the bulk. Milo is also on the Night Scout team, but he made that Fitbit watch face that's really the best one out there. The Night Scout team certainly deserves a whole bunch of credit. And since I referenced a formal paper, I thought I'd cite that here. That's that graph at the beginning that showed 65% success in an ICU. And finally, I want to thank my doctor, Dr. L. He's a phenomenal endocrinologist, and there are people there are doctors that dump their patients when they find out that they're doing this. And Dr. L has been nothing but supportive. He has me talk to his med students when they're around. I really wish him luck. And man, I dread the phone call from his office every time because he's getting up there and he's probably going to retire soon. I just hope he's staying as healthy as he can, all things considered, while helping everybody that he can. So I talked a little bit about who I was and my background. We opened up the conversation about diabetes, talked about hardware, software, and the safety aspects that are pretty important. We did talked about iterative improvements, and I showed you some demos and some devices, results for both myself and the medical industry and the regulatory frameworks. Talked about exponential growth, and now I will take questions.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks. Similarly, thanks to you for agreeing to convert to the virtual format. I know it's not quite what you guys were signing up for either. So appreciate the words of kindness towards us, but both ways, man.
Well earned.
Hey, there's a couple of people typing, so there might be some questions coming. There haven't been any sort of discrete, explicit questions, but there's been a lot of chat about just how crazy expensive a lot of this stuff is, and kind of stemming off of that, I was curious. Is that sort of a primary motivation for some of your work? Is it cost focused, or is it some other aspect?
So it was mostly, I came to this project trying to keep my blood sugar numbers as low as I could without having those dangerous and frankly terrifying episodes that I had kind of back to back. One was at an IKEA, and one was, of all places, DEF CON, where help was not readily available. So after that, I kind of looked to this to sort of to get help for free. Again, there's a lot of not thinking that I get to do while this thing just takes over and does it very well, including, again, when I'm asleep. And so that was really my motivation to get involved.
Nice. I delayed just long enough that now we have some questions coming in.
Nice.
So that works out well. What security controls are incorporated in the project?
Security controls. So it is a Linux box. The only thing that it exposes are a Fuse web server and an SSH. So strong passwords on your SSH username. You can't do anything to it over that web server. It's read only. Night Scout, you have to enter a password to be able to make changes to the system. What else? I have not checked lately, but last time I did check, all of the packages and everything that was pulled in during setup was done over HTTPS. It uses, since it's just Wi-Fi, you can use your WPA2 passwords for that. Trying to think. The connection, the Bluetooth chatter between the receiver and or OpenAPS does have encryption on it. And the only thing that is plain text is the underlying OpenAPS to Insulin Pump comms. But again, you have to be well within range to actually affect all of that stuff in any sort of dangerous way. At that point, it's probably easier to push someone in front of a car than go through all that trouble.
Gotcha. So that gets down to sort of weakest link, least resistant path sort of things.
Yep.
Hey, if somebody was sort of a non-hacker folk or didn't feel as comfortable making this stuff work as you do, is there an avenue to obtain this sort of thing? And
Yes.
What would it cost for sort of the average person to go down this route?
Yeah, so there is if you're familiar with GitHub, there is a sister service called Gitter, which is a little chat area. There are chat rooms all about this stuff that I'm happy to point people to when I get back into Discord. If somebody wants to either DM me or if I end up finding it, who said that in the room. Your average outlay, I think, is probably less than $200. You need $35 for the Pi itself, the Raspberry Pi itself. The radio board, I want to say, was something like $150. But those are one-time costs as long as you're not doing too much that's crazy. And after that, it's off-the-shelf USB batteries or lithium polymer batteries. The LiPos can be $10, $15 depending on where you get them. I change it probably once a year. It probably goes through all of its duty cycles before it starts introducing weirdness. And the USB battery, I think it took me 2 years for it to stop going the full 12 to 16 hours on a charge.
Cool. And then, so in Discord, if I remember right, it's basically your name, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's just Jay Lagorio. I'm in there.
Great. So if people want to track down, you can definitely, when you get back on, jump into the Bat of Doom channel and look at sort of around your time frame. But if people want to find Jay Lagorio, at Jay Lagorio in Discord, blue tag, identifying the speaker, of course. Thanks, Jay, for the time. That's a quite interesting talk, and it's an interesting story and a project that your talk is about.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I look forward to seeing you again next year.
Next year, in person.
Yep.
Cheers. Thanks.